Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Busmaker, and today I'm pleased to have a conversation with Erik Falt. Erik, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frits. Thank you for having me.
Erik, I'm going to share briefly a little bit of your background to the audience, so they already have a little bit of context. You studied journalism, history, English in France, and American studies in Purdue in the States. Then you started to work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France for a couple of years, and since 1992, you have been with the UN in various capacities, and I would say in a very long list of interesting countries. And I'm going to read the countries because that I think is very interesting to share with the audience. Cambodia, Haiti, Iraq, Pakistan, Kenya, USA, France, India, Morocco, and Jamaica, where you're now the regional director of UNESCO. Again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with something which I don't know if that's a correct assumption or not, but the studies you have done, journalism, history, English, almost suggests that already at university you were thinking about becoming a diplomat. Is that true or not?
No, I would not say so. And I think perhaps that's where we can start. I mean, I'm often asked at this stage of my career if I had planned my career. And no, not at all. And I would actually recommend to younger people not to sort of rigidly set out career plans or make overly complicated projections about their career. I now do a lot of mentoring of younger people within the UN in particular, and that's certainly one of the things that I tell them. It's fine if things, if you plan and things go according to plan, but they often do not. So for my part, I've tried throughout my both personal and professional life to recognize and seize opportunities as they came my way. So that for me has been the way to progress. Initially, yes, I intended to pursue a career in journalism. That was the plan from my younger days, and my first degree was in journalism. But then, I did other things, and an opportunity arose. First, to work at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I decided to take the chance, and it turned out quite well. And then a few years later, another adventure presented itself, where when the UN offered me the position of spokesperson for the peacekeeping operation in Cambodia. I went for that as well, and so on and so on. So for me, it has not been about planning at all. Life has been a long series of moments, opportunities, if you want, that I was just able to seize. And that is really something that I would encourage others to consider. Of course, we're all different, but this sort of a bit of a carpe diem mindset, if you want.
I got that. Does that also mean, in your experience, you easily recognize those opportunities handed to you, or what's your take on that?
I think it boils down to instinct in large part and experience after a while. I think that being able to recognize an opportunity is something that is very important in life in general. And it probably rests also on, education and my younger years. I work for UNESCO, so education is of course very important, and I do recognize that my education probably and experiences at a younger age gave me a chance to develop certain instincts. Yes, if you want.
Okay, so at a certain moment, you started to work for UN agency, UNESCO, but you've stayed with that organization, well, for over 35 years. So you're very much an international career diplomat and on the highest level. Why did you stay for all those years?
Clearly, the UN is what corresponds the best to who I am and who I have become. I've always wanted to offer a small contribution. And what I've truly most enjoyed in my career, and yes, I've held 10 different positions with the UN, is really the opportunity, I use that word again, to embrace the diversity of our world. I really get bored if I stay too long in one place, especially in my own country, because I know that country best, and I see the frailties and the weaknesses best. So life is too short not to be able to explore new places, and above all to meet new people. And along the way, if you can make a small contribution, that is even better.
Now, I just mentioned a whole list of countries you've been part of. Is that, do you get a say in which countries you're going to be posted or not? Can you give a preference? How does that work?
It's often a negotiation, and there again, to see an opportunity, to see something that you had not necessarily thought about, but you realize that your experience matches the requirements of the position, and you just try to apply with as much enthusiasm as you can. That's certainly what I have been able to do. I didn't think that I would travel to all of these countries, and it has been all over the world, really. But again, it's not a question of planning. It's a question of
Okay.
being able to say, this one's for me.
Yeah. Now, I have to know, I don't know if as a diplomat you're willing to answer that question, but do you have any favorites? Are there any countries or regions where so I had the best part of my life, or is everybody just as
No,
valuable?
absolutely. I mean, I've enjoyed every single country where I have served for different reasons, and I think you have to look at the positive of life. I think this is also very important. If you get stuck with the negatives, you're not going to enjoy life and the moment. So I've enjoyed being in Haiti. I've enjoyed being in Pakistan and India, in the United States, in my last postings in Morocco, and now in Jamaica. So every place has its own advantages, and you have to adapt. You have to try to understand the culture and the peculiarities of a particular place and the people. And you always, what is important is always to remember that you're a guest in these countries, and that you have to adapt to them, not the other way around. You don't come with your own background and try to say that it was the best. That is the wrong recipe. And I've seen a number of people coming into the UN with their own background, thinking that it was the only way. It is never the only way, and it's very important to always remember that.
That's a very valuable lesson, I think, for anybody in any role. I would say first listen and see what somebody else has to offer. Uh, One question I have: you're now the regional director, UNESCO, based out of Kingston, Jamaica. What could you describe a typical day? What does a work day look like?
Days are always very different, and it also depends. I mean, as you know, we've just gone through a pretty horrific hurricane which has devastated half of the island. Life in Kingston has returned more or less to normal, but for us, it continues to be an everyday mobilization to try to see how we can contribute to the recovery effort led by the government of Jamaica in the field of reference of UNESCO, education, culture, the sciences, communication and information, and trying to see how we can have some real impact in all of these areas. Modestly, always, because obviously alone an organization like UNESCO can only offer a limited amount of help. But to stay mobilized every day right now is certainly what we have to do. And that's what we have to do in general, trying to be useful. We're lucky to be serving the United Nations. We have a responsibility. I have a responsibility. And it's important that every day when I wake up, I have a good cup of coffee and then try to get going as fast as possible to mobilize the team that is working with me and to modestly, but to try to make a difference.
Okay. Now, over the years, after 35 years, you've gained a lot of experience as a diplomat, and you just mentioned you mentor people, you have a team. So how do you take your team to understand what's the best way to approach their work?
Hmm. Well, along the way, I've also, yes, developed some ideas and I don't know, it would be a bit arrogant to call it a philosophy of work, but I do offer to my team some basic guiding principles. I call it a little bit my ABC. I conceptualize it in French, but it works also in English. The A is always, and that's perhaps the most important, for anticipation. I think this is very important. And anticipation is about seeing sort of beyond the immediate, looking not just at what is present, but what might unfold, looking at options. So in practical terms, it means that when you know, for instance, a specific event is coming, you try to examine all the elements, think through the possible scenarios, and to consider the solutions before they are needed. You know, I've seen that too often people prepare in a way that seems thorough, but only to realize that many angles were overlooked. So anticipation is very important. It's about avoiding blind spots. It's about cultivating awareness so that you can act with clarity and precisions. And it's not only about times of crisis like we're still living here now in Jamaica. I think it's valid in life more generally. My
Uh,
B,
yeah.
if yeah, my
No,
B is always to sort of be happy. And that's what I tell my team. I really insist on that because it's really fundamental. You can't work in a tense environment where you can guess that people don't enjoy being with each other, where they're sort of stressed or rigid or afraid to laugh. So happiness at work is not about frivolity. It's really about creating a space where people feel safe, comfortable, and valued. And then the most important, my C, is creativity. And that's also very important. We're not just there to be bureaucrats and apply recipes. No, I think we have to always try to think critically, imagine new possibilities, and challenge assumptions. It's really about approaching uh, problems in ways that go beyond traditional methods. And we certainly have tried to do that here in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. We've really tried to look at the obvious impacts of the crisis to see how we could be useful and to be creative, find practical solutions that might fill gaps that others might have missed. So for me, that's what I try to suggest to the teams I work with.
okay. I got all the explanation of the A, B, and C, but missed what the B stand for again.
The B, well, again, it was conceptualized in French, which is bonne humeur, which
Okay, good. Yeah,
say be happy.
be
Uh,
happy.
I,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay,
we have
got
to
it.
be happy.
Yeah, and this brings me to a question again. Looking at all those countries, they all have different cultures, different way of interacting with each other. Have you seen that your approach to work, I would say, applies to all cultures, or are there significant differences in how you uh, should work with people on all those local levels?
Of course, you work differently in every country where you're based. You have to try to study very quickly and understand, what makes a certain nation and people tick, what they will react positively and negatively to. You really have to see how to adapt to them and think creatively about how, as a representative of your organization, in this case for me now, UNESCO, you can be contributing positively to what they want to achieve. So that's clearly the one of the keys to working efficiently as a UN civil servant.
Yeah. And do you see is like a common is there a commonality with across all those countries and all those cultures? So is it like a universal element people have?
Well, it's not necessarily a universal element you find, but I like to, for personal reasons, to try to see indeed what brings us together. I think I do find, despite differences in the culture, that humanism is deeply ingrained in all cultures, one way or the other, whether it is dominated by a religious factor, a leader that maybe that country has had, or otherwise. That's also what links these countries to the United Nations and to the ideal of the United Nations in general. So that, if I have to find a commonality, it is there.
Okay. Well, brings me to a question, an observation, talking to a number of people over the years that one would argue that the connections you then make lead to a better understanding of each other and actually brings people closer to each other. Or do you also see because we better understand each other, we actually create the distance?
Hmm. Well, this boils down to what we are as a community of humans, and that's a very complex question. From my perspective, of course, a community first depends on the identity of the group. This is true everywhere around the world. I think, members of a community need to feel that they belong and share something common, a social identity, and this can be political, religious, geographical. It's a sense of belonging. Um, I also have seen the downsides of belonging to a community. I mean, in a number of countries, this has led to exclusion of others. That can be also very dangerous. That's why, personally, I don't feel a particular need to myself belong exclusively to a community. It is one reason, for instance, why I stepped away from the religion into which I was born. I prefer to sort of remain open rather than confined to a necessarily restricted community. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that would be my answer.
It's a very personal question. That's the always good here. Brings me to another question: is where do you draw your inspiration from?
Mm. Uh, I think probably in large part education, very important for anybody. Education, education, education. And I was lucky to be born in what I'd like to call sort of a normal family or conventional family, if you prefer, very
Mm.
loving. And that environment was very important because first it shielded me from certain offerings. I was raised in a rural community and very far away from a large city where there are many things that are not necessarily helpful for an education. But I would say that I benefited from a humanist education from my parents. Um, well, we're approaching Christmas, and this is always reminding me of one defining moment. I think it was when I was about 10 years old. It was Christmas Eve, and the whole family was getting ready for the religious ceremonies. I was born into a Catholic family, though later I drifted from organized religion. But that evening, my father, who was a medical doctor, a general practitioner, announced that he would not come with us to mass. And I remember my sisters and I were almost in tears. How could he miss such an important moment? But then he sort of placed his hand on my head and said something I never forgot. He told me that God would understand that some things are more important than mass. He explained that he had to care for a little girl who was very sick and that it was much more important than attending mass. And well, that moment really struck me. And it probably in many ways shaped the way I began to think about life and priorities from a young age. And it certainly remains a defining memory for me. And I dare say a defining moment.
Yeah. Would you consider that to be a milestone in your life or in your career?
Probably a
Yeah.
milestone in my early personal life. There were, of course, others along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Some other, I would say, key milestones which compare to what you just shared with us?
I'm sorry?
Are there any other significant milestones which compare with the story you just told us?
Oh, there were many, um, and some would probably take too long to recall. But I've been lucky to also work early in my career with inspirational leaders. I had a chance to work closely in Cambodia with Sergio Vieira de Mello, who became a legend for all of us who work in the UN. I worked very closely in a number of countries in Haiti and elsewhere with Lakhdar Brahimi from Algeria, who's also one of the most highly respected and revered figures in the UN, Kofi Annan at moments. And all of those individuals had a strong impact on me. And for each one of them, there were moments that again would be too long to recall.
Yeah.
That were important to me.
Yeah. Now, we've covered quite a long career. To what extent has that been a smooth ride, or have there been, I would say, failures which led to lessons learned? Have there been some brilliant mistakes in your life?
Well, challenges and failures. Well, of course. Well, I like to, as I alluded to earlier, I see life mostly on the bright side. I think if something does not succeed, I tend to think that, well, it simply was not meant to be. It's not the end of the world. And I try to accept that fully. In my case, I've been rather fortunate. So I don't have too many failures to recount. You know what? When people talk about challenges and failure nowadays, I'm just realizing that a lot of people use the word resilience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that word. It's overused these days. They tell you that in life you have to be resilient, accept failures, and I think, an aversion to this term, and it goes back to a conference I attended, I think, in Haiti about maybe 20 years ago. At the time, we were discussing the supposed need for Haitians to demonstrate resilience. And I remember vividly one individual, an intellectual, who stood up and questioned this idea, asking, what do you mean resilience? What does it mean? Does it imply that because we are Haitians, we are destined to be poor and unhappy, and that we must merely show resilience? He disagreed profoundly, and his point struck me deeply, and I believe that he was right. What I mean to say that this is we see UN organizations. I'm thinking of one in particular using the word resilience in their motto. That's totally inappropriate. It suggests, that enduring hardship as almost an end in itself, rather than seeking meaningful solutions for change.
Yeah.
And I think that these are words that we should be rejecting quite clearly.
Definitely, if you translate that to saying to people, stay in your lane, you're not allowed or supposed to grow or improve your life. That's the translation you deny, which I very much understand and accept. Now, I was wondering, the posting you have in Jamaica at the moment, will it be your last posting, or are you already looking ahead? What's going to happen after Jamaica?
It has to be my last posting because I'm reaching the end of the cycle, but I'm looking forward to what I will be doing afterwards. I'm looking at options again with the same attitude that I've tried to outline, and I'm sure it will be a entertaining adventure too.
I would say you've already given some advice, but on to young people out there starting their own career. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, we started a little bit with that. I think not planning too much is really important.
Yeah.
At the same time, we've tried to be positive, but I also worry about our world today. I certainly have not changed the world, but the world has changed a great deal on its own over the course of my 35-year career with the UN, and it's not for the better. And I worry about the direction things are taking, and for young people in particular, my children. I think that we need to at some stage have some return to humanist ideals that we embraced immediately after World War II. The leaders we have now, both at the head of countries or international organizations are not of the same caliber as the ones I have known. I realize that I sound like a grumpy old person when I say that, but if we continue to lose the principles and progress we once had, we will regress. We have started to regress quite noticeably in the last several years, and that's extremely concerning. So I hope that out of the younger generations will come up not just one, but a number of leaders all over the world, which can reverse this extremely worrying trends of the past few years.
Eric, I think this is such a high note that I think we should end our discussion on that, or say, call to action to that next generation. And let's pass that on. So, final question for me of you: how do you want people to remember you? What's your brand?
I don't want to be remembered as having a brand in particular, but I try to be driven by an aspiration to justice. I think that's what the UN is about, and that's why I like to work for the United Nations and UNESCO. I think I'm often characterized as having, well, that's right. I try to develop a mix of a reason and emotion. And I think we need to keep our energy and passion every day in life. Again, life is beautiful. It's too short. We need to embrace it as positively as we can.
Eric, Falt, UNESCO, thank you so much for being with us on The Brand Called You.
Thank you, Fritz.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.